Dear beloved community, it's such a joy to be together with everybody. Welcome to May the 16th of the year 2021. Here in Mountain Spring, we're enjoying a beautiful autumn. The autumn colors are everywhere. For me, one of my great joys in this season is to walk around and to enjoy the beautiful colors that are everywhere. They're changing from moment to moment. It's absolutely stunning. I'm so happy to have a chance to be sharing again with you after what seems like a little while. I was reflecting over the past few days on some of the experiences that I've had with Tay, my own teacher, and all of the teachers that I've had through my life. And this morning I was sharing with friends that a number of years ago, there was a point in which Tay used to suddenly turn to us monastics and he would ask us suddenly out of nowhere to give a Dharma talk. We could be having a meal and just after the two bells to end the silent meal, Tay would say, Brother Phappai or Sister Gina or Sister Annabelle, give a Dharma talk. Or we might be just sitting with Tay on his deck, give a Dharma talk. Or any number of occasions like that, Tay would suddenly out of the blue say, give a Dharma talk. And we were not able to say, I'm not ready, Tay. No, I've got nothing to share, Tay. And so on. The one time one of the monastics did that, Tay said, you need to be ready at all the time to be able to share from your experience, to share something that's alive for you. If you don't have something to share when I ask you to give a Dhamma talk, you're not my student. And so I really took that as a powerful invitation. Not to be ready to give a Dharma talk all the time with our mouth. That's the least important kind of Dharma talk. In fact, it's not even the real Dharma. I realize the irony of sharing that as I'm giving a Dharma talk. A Dharma talk is not the real Dharma. The Dharma is found in life. A Dharma talk at most can point the direction towards the Dharma, towards your true nature, but words by their nature can only hint at what the ultimate reality is. So when Tay asked us to always be ready to give a Dharma talk, he didn't mean to be always ready to open our mouth and to speak. What he was asking each of his students to do is to be ready to do as he does and as he did, which was to give a Dharma talk with and in each and every moment of our life, to allow our life to be an expression of the wisdom, the insight that we generate through our practice. That a Dharma talk is not something separate from that. So for me, I took that as an invitation to always be ready, to do my best to not be complacent, to do my best to not sink back into thinking that these moments which make up my life are insignificant, and that I'll get to the good stuff later on, but that each moment, as difficult or as wonderful as it is the moment in which to come alive. So a real Dharma talk is not with words. For those of us that are perhaps in training to be Dharma teachers, I really want to underline that when Tay asked us to give a Dharma talk, he's asking us as his students to give a real Dharma talk, the real Dharma talk of each and every moment, the Dharma talk of being able to open and close a door mindfully, the Dharma talk of being able to inhabit your steps, to inhabit a breath, to be fully yourself in every situation. Then that way we can be worthy to be our teacher's students, our teacher's continuation. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been reflecting back on a very beautiful text that was composed in the 13th century by the Zen master Dogen, who many of you are familiar with. The text is called the Tenzo Kyoka. In English, I think we can call it the instructions to be given to the cook. I have a particular affinity with this text because I have a background in cooking, but it's also one of the most profound and pithy Zen texts. It can be easily mistaken as a manual for cooking or how to cook in a temple, but in fact, Dogen is sharing about the very essence of the practice life. And I think later on in some series, I'm going to give a series of talks on this beautiful text. In this text, which I'll just mention a couple of aspects of this evening, there are a few lines that have been very present for me this past week. And in fact, it came up in conversation this morning with a young practitioner who's here at Mountain Spring. Dogen shares with us that we shouldn't be caught up in the idea of superior or inferior ingredients. Rather, respect them for what they are. So here in this verse, Dogen's using food as a metaphor. He's speaking about recognizing the ingredients of our life. When we read that line, don't be caught up in the idea of superior or inferior ingredients. The first thing to notice is our tendency, let's be really honest, to spend a lot of our life and especially our practice lives comparing our situation with the situation of others. We might think that, oh, compared to others, I have inferior conditions or I have inferior ingredients. Or there might be some of us who think that we have superior ingredients to everybody else. I don't think there's many of us who think that way, but it could be the case. Perhaps we also think that there are some aspects of our being when we look into ourselves that are not part of our path, not part of our spiritual journey. So when Dogen invites us to respect each ingredient for what it is, he's inviting us to respect all the different aspects of our experience, to respect them for what they are, and to understand that each of these ingredients that make up our experience are necessary in the dish, in creating the dish that we call our life or the offering of our life. I've shared in an earlier series of talks that to me, a bodhisattva is a practitioner who practices to befriend all things, even that which is difficult, even that which before we thought we needed to get rid of. To befriend all things doesn't mean that we don't look at transforming it. That would be a mistake. But rather it means that we take a non-oppositional approach. Just because a particular ingredient that you might have in your kitchen or a particular ingredient that you might have in your mind or your heart or your life doesn't taste good to you, doesn't mean that it's not useful. In fact, it might be the most useful thing of all. Dogen continues on in this text to say, allow your life to become one with your work. So here we're talking about the work in terms of the great work, not the small work, the busyness that we allow to take over and inhabit our lives so often, more often than is useful. But we're talking here about the great work of transforming our mind and heart. Here, Dogen's reminding us that there really should be no separation between what we call the spiritual life and our ordinary life. And that really is one of the strong emphasis of Plum Village, of our teacher, that there's no such thing as just having formal periods of sitting meditation and then there's the rest of our life. But in fact, we become interested in how somebody inhabits the ordinary moments of their life. We don't really care how many hours somebody sits on a cushion if they cannot inhabit the ordinary moments of their life with the same quality of attention. So when we read this line, allow your life to become one with your work, this is what's being shared, what we're being invited into. And for me, when I reflect on these wonderful gifts that we received from our teachers, which all of us in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha have been reflecting on this past week, then for me, I feel that is one of the main gifts that my teacher Tay has offered to me, has offered to all of us, to see that each and every moment of our life is a moment in which we allow and invite this energy of mindfulness to inhabit us, to be able to help us to look more deeply into our experience just as it is, and to be able to generate insight right in the heart of what's going on. When there's a red light, when we're busy, when we're having difficulties, that's exactly the moment in which transformation is possible. In fact, it's much more possible than sitting on a cushion as an escape from our everyday life. But also in this line, there's an invitation. In addition to the invitation that was already shared about seeing no separation between our spiritual practice and lifting a fork, the question and the invitation is for each of us to ask ourselves and reflect on what is our work. What is our real work? The work of transformation that we're called into, the transformation of mind and heart that we're called into, each one of us. Aspiration is something that is quite general and is something that all of us have. But at the same time, there's an incredibly unique aspect to aspiration. And this question of what is my real work? What am I being called to look into? What's the wisdom that's wanting to be born in me is a question that I find very helpful to return to and reflect on often, if not every day. Then Dogen continues to share, a soup is not necessarily superior because it's made from the most expensive ingredients. Neither is it inferior because it's made from ordinary greens. Never feel aversion towards your own plain ingredients. One of the big mistakes of our time is to think that there's something wrong with being plain, simple, and unadorned. In fact, a real cook or a real practitioner brings forth the essence of what's been there all along. We don't need all the bells and whistles, but the practice is about letting go, as we've been discovering in the Book of Eights, letting go of layer upon layer of self-identification and places that we hide, and revealing that which has been there all along, simple and unadorned. And to me, real insight is not complicated. Real insight comes in those aha moments in which a very simple truth is revealed. Insight is something that seems so familiar when it comes. And then Dogen continues, make use of whatever ingredients you've been given, holding them as carefully as you are holding your own eyes. So here, Dogen's inviting us again to look at the conditions that we have, the conditions that you have, the pain in your body, the joy in your heart, your family around you, the despair that you have, the loneliness, the jealousy, the compassion, the insight, looking at all of the situations of our life, the ingredients that you have been given, and hold each of them as carefully as you would hold your own eyes. There's a tendency to hold the things that we think we want to cultivate, such as happiness or peace or joy, very carefully, very lovingly, very tenderly, and to not have that same care towards the things that we don't necessarily want to see. Perhaps anger, perhaps depression, perhaps sadness. But here, Dogen, just like the Buddha did in the Discourse on Love, in the Metta Sutta, is inviting us to see all of these aspects of our being, all of these experiences as having incredible value. All of these experiences are the grounds from which insight is born. And that our practice is not about getting something. If there's one thing that when I pass away, I want my friends to remember And that is that practice is not about getting something or getting somewhere. For example, getting enlightenment or getting liberated. This would be a mistaken notion because it's based on time and space. And if we have notions based on time and space, as we've discovered in our talks on the Book of Eights, they cannot describe ultimate reality. If we think that we're going to get liberation, then we've made liberation or nirvana into a thing, into an object, rather than a realization, rather than a discovery of the ground of being, which has been there all along. Dogen tells us when we discover that the truth, that which we seek, is already within us, then all of a sudden we are our original selves. And if practice is anything, it's about returning to that which has been there all along. Rather than getting something, it's about progressively letting go. Letting go of all of the ways we've identified, including identifying liberation as something in the future or a particular state of being. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. We have about 3 more talks in the series of the Book of Eights, and I can't wait to continue on with this series, but I decided to take a little detour, as I sometimes do, since I was reflecting on teachers along with everyone in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, and I thought that it would be a wonderful opportunity to share about some of the great teachers that I've had an opportunity to come into contact with. And also for us to reflect at this moment in time on what our practice is. Since our teacher emphasized practice so much, and if we asked our teacher what practice is, our teacher would respond that practice is stopping, calming, resting, and healing. Stopping is a practice that is very familiar to those of us who've been to any Plum Village Center. On the outer level, if ever you come to a Plum Village Center or a monastery around the world or a local Sangha, you'll notice that whenever we hear the sound of the bell, we practice stopping physically, but also we practice stopping our thinking mind, we stop our speech, we come back to our true nature in those moments. But on a deeper level, it means that we're cultivating this capacity that we call shamatha, which can be translated as stopping, but learning to rest, learning to be at home in every moment in our body and in our mind. Whenever I think about stopping, I think about a time when I was TASE attendant. I was very young back then, and myself and another brother, we were attending at the same time. He's my ordination brother, Brother Fabhoy. He is currently in Deer Park Monastery, and we were both attending at the same time, as I just shared. And somehow there was a bit of rivalry between us at that time. We both wanted to be the best attendant ever. And so I would try to, be the one to be ready with Tay's jacket after the Dharma talk. So Tay would come to me and put his arms in the jacket, and Brother Fabhoy would try to beat me to that or to other things. And one time he and I were in Tay's hut attending Tay, and I thought, right, I'm going to be the one. I'm going to beat Tay Fabhoy. So that day, I was about 5 seconds before Fapoi with every single thing, and Tay was getting ready to come to the Dharma hall to give his Dharma talk. And I was preparing Tay's tea tray when Tay gave a Dharma talk. One of the things that his attendants would have would always be a tea tray with a teapot and a thermos with hot water and a cup and these kind of things for Tay. So I prepared this tea tray, had everything ready, and Brother Fapoi picked up Tay's bags. And anyway, we followed Tay out the door. And Te Whapoi was trying to go in front of me, and I was trying to go in front of Te Whapoi. And as we were walking on Tay's deck, I felt really proud of myself because I pushed myself right in front of Te Whapoi. Now, I should probably back up and remind those of you who were not in Plum Village in the early days that those of us in Plum Village in the early days always wore wooden clogs. Our teacher Tay wore wooden clogs, and all of us monastics wore those because they were very cheap in France and they were very good for walking through the mud of Plum Village. The one thing that they were not so good at is grip. They didn't have a lot of grip on the soles. In some way we kind of liked them because you had to walk very mindfully in these wooden clogs, these gardening shoes, but there were moments in which they were not the most wonderful shoes to have. And Tay's deck, for those of you who've ever been to Plum Village and been on Tay's deck, it's a wooden deck, and in that area of France it can rain quite a lot. So it had been raining quite a bit, and as I was carrying Tay's tea tray, the inevitable happened. My feet began to slip, and I began to scramble, and I couldn't get my grip at all. After having pushed in front of Te Whapoi to be in front and close to Tay. And so up the tea tray went into the air, and I completely fell on my back, and the teapot and everything flew through the air and smashed on the deck. And me, I'd fallen on my back, and Tay turned around and he looked at me and said, oh my goodness. And I just said to him, Tay, I'm okay, go ahead. But I was covered in slime and in mud and everything. This was not an example of stopping. This is not an example of stopping our running. This is an example of the kind of grasping mind. And usually we notice that if we're attentive, we notice that in those moments, if we're able to be attentive towards our grasping mind, there's usually an experience of slipping up like that something tends to slip. So this was a very physical example of slipping up, but I invite you, in terms of your own practice, to notice when you're grasping onto something, grasping onto some experience or some position or some view or some position from which you form a self. And then notice those moments in which something slips like that you have the flip side of the experience. It's a very interesting area of contemplation. Hopefully you don't need to have a physical experience like me to understand that on a more subtle level, there's something going on. So each of us has been very lucky to have had the opportunity to encounter the Dharma, to encounter teachers that have taught us to stop. And we know that stopping is both a practice, but it's also a fruit. There are some people who come to Plum Village and think that the practice is really superficial, that we practice stopping and it's a childish kind of practice, or we practice to open the door and close the door silently and walk slowly. And these are beginners' practices, and later on, we'll get to the advanced practices. Well, there may be some more advanced practices, but the advanced practices will bring you back to these basic practices, because the real secret in Buddhism is the most advanced practices are hidden within the most basic ones. They're both a beginning practice and they're the fruit. So stopping is a practice and also a fruit. And each of us has been lucky enough to meet teachers who have been able to share this practice with us. We've been lucky enough to encounter the Dharma. We've been lucky enough to have been guided by wise teachers and to have had that guidance penetrate at some level. This is something to celebrate. A teacher is anyone who calls you forth. Most of the time, this calling forth is going to be uncomfortable. Since if we are really lucky, that teacher is going to call us forth out of our entrenchments. And most of the time, the things that we think of as liberation, as enlightenment, as freedom are actually our entrenchments. This is one of the main themes in the Book of Eights, that often the conditioned experiences that it is conditioned experiences that we mistake for liberation. So if we meet a teacher that offers us teachings that challenges us, that makes us feel a little bit uncomfortable, that helps us to question the assumptions that we've had up to now, that is a wonderful thing. That's something that is a great blessing, because hopefully we've met somebody that's going to help call us forth and not just enable us to dig ourselves down even deeper into our entrenchments or the deep trenches that we've created. So I really want to ask you to consider the ways in which you've been called forth. When we're considering teachers, then we need to consider how they've called us forth. And perhaps what we consider at this moment in time that we still need to be called forth from. It's a similar question to the earlier question about what we consider to be our real work. So if you met a teacher, what would you hope that teacher would call you forth from or offer you guidance on? I'm especially reflecting on, in addition to reflecting on my own root teacher, I'm reflecting on another teacher that I had a chance to meet and to practice with, who's very dear to us in Plum Village, and that's Theyak Tan. Theyak Tan had a hut in Upper Hamlet of Plum Village, and he was the first abbot of Deer Park Monastery. If ever you visit Deer Park Monastery, you can go to visit his stupa. There's a pagoda for Theyak Tan on the side of the mountain. I've shared this story previously that he at one point was our novice master, and I consider that to be one of the great fortunes of my monastic life. He was a practitioner of great realization, and he had had a very traditional training, but at the same time, he was able to transcend the form in a very beautiful way. And he shared with us that as novices, that the most important aspect of our spiritual life would be not to cover things over with a whole lot of bells and incense. And I felt that that was a really powerful transmission from him as a practitioner, to not cover things over with a whole lot of bells and incense, but just to be absolutely ourselves. Theyak Tan was known for being quite iconoclastic, so he would often walk around just in his short robes and things like that. And he had a walking stick, very much in the Zen master mold. And one day, our teacher Tay called all of the monastics to the transformation hall, our meditation hall in Upper Hamlet. So all of the Plum Village monastics at that time, we were not that many. I think in total we were about 40 monastics entirely in the Plum Village tradition at that time. And he had all of us sit in the hall. And then he said, I want to hear every single monastic invite the bell, since the bell is the real sign of somebody's practice. And in order to invite the bell in the monastery, in the Plum Village center, you need to have a solid practice. So only those that can practice correctly are allowed to invite the bell. So we all got in line and we would go and invite the bell. It was pretty nerve-wracking to go and invite the bell in front of Tay. It was a little bit like a dharma combat. And anyway, so everyone, one by one, we went and invite the bell, and Tay would just shake his head, shake his head, shake his head. There was only one person who Tay said, this sound is a good sound, and that was Tay Ak Tan. Because Tay Ak Tan just went up and without bowing or anything like that, like the rest of us, he just went up and invited the bell, but it was the most pure and beautiful sound. And I'll never forget that. Not Sister Chen Kom, not Sister Annabelle, not Tay Phap Ung, not anyone, not myself, only Tay Ak Tan got the seal of approval from Tay for inviting the sound of the bell. A few years later, we were practicing together in Vermont, in Green Mountain Dharma Center in Maple Forest Monastery, and we were enjoying the winter retreat there. And we used to go for days of mindfulness to the sisters' hamlet. And as we were doing walking meditation outside, I was walking near Tay Ak Tan, and Tay Ak Tan stooped down and he began to make a snowball. At that time, Sister Annabelle, who many of you know, Sister Chenduk, was leading the walking meditation. And everybody was walking very seriously, in a very concentrated way. Tay Ak Tan stooped down and made a snowball, and then suddenly he raised his arm and he threw it right at Sister Annabelle, and the snowball hit her in the back. And she turned around and she said, "Who was that?" And Tay Ak Tan waved at her like this, and she had no choice but to smile and to laugh. And somehow the joy that was that manifested during that walking meditation was something that I'll never forget. There were no more snowballs that were thrown during the walking meditation, but I see this as Tay Ak Tan's way of being like a Zen master with a stick, to throw a snowball and to wake everybody up to the wonders of the moment. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. There's a lot of pressure on me now after I shared the bell story to invite a sound of the bell, but I'll do my best. One of the hallmarks in Chinese Buddhism, Japanese Buddhism, Korean Buddhism, and Vietnamese Buddhism is the use of insight gathas. And many of the great masters, including Master Rinzai, Master Liu Guan, many great masters have written insight gathas that share the fruit of their understanding in a very pithy way. And so when we belong to a particular lineage, one of the things that we learn very quickly are the gathas of our lineage. These are very beautiful transmissions of insight in seed form, but they perform many functions. In the Buddhist world, we're all related. So and one of the ways that we find out how we're related is through insight gathas. We share, if we belong to a similar lineage, then the insight gatha will be the same. For example, if we belong to the Rinzai lineage, which Plum Village does, then you can go to the temple of Master Rinzai. It's in Hebei province in the north of China, about 4 hours from Beijing. And you can see the insight gatha of Master Rinzai on the wall there. And then if you look at the 42nd character, it will be the character that begins our Dharma names. Because we belong to the 42nd and 43rd generations of Master Rinzai, of the Rinzai school. Tay is the 42nd, we're the 43rd. So this is how it goes. And we listen to other people's dharma names, and we know exactly where they are in the lineage and how they're related to us. This is how it works. Whether that monastic is from China, or they're from Korea, or from Japan, from Vietnam, we can figure this out. And different lineages have different insight gathas. It's a little bit like Harry Potter, but that's our family tree. For those of us in our lineage, when we've received the Dharma name of the heart, that's the 9th character in our the transmission Gatha of Master Liu Guan. I read it a couple of weeks ago when we had the Order of Interbeing transmission. The 9th character is here, which is heart or mind. And so when somebody receives a Dharma name, it doesn't just come out of the sky, but it comes from the transmission Gathas. And it's a way of rooting into that wisdom, into that tree. So, and then we know, for example, my students, when I transmit the trainings to my students, they'll all be called something of the source, because the next character in the poem is the source. So in Master Liu Guan's Gatha was, the great way of reality is our true nature's pure ocean. The source of mind, or the source of heart, penetrates everywhere. From the roots of virtue springs the practice of compassion. Precepts, concentration, and insight, the nature and function of all these three are one. The fruit of transcendent wisdom can be realized by being wonderfully together. Maintain and transmit the wonderful principle in order to reveal the true teaching. For the realization of true emptiness to be possible, wisdom and action must go together. So for those of us who have become Dharma teachers, we have been asked to share an insight Gatha in a similar vein with our teacher Thay. And that poem, that Gatha, is either accepted or rejected. So it's a practice that I offer to friends occasionally when we're on retreat together, to write an insight Gatha. It doesn't need to be the ultimate insight Gatha of insight Gathas, but I think it's a beautiful practice for us to come into contact with this transmission of wisdom, this transmission of insight from our lived experience. So it's always been lovely when people have written their insight Gathas. And I wanted to share a little bit about this tonight, partially because some of you were asking how we give Dharma names, but also because Theak Tan was an amazing Zen poet. And I thought it would be wonderful to share a few of his poems, but also interspersed with the poems of Ryokan, who was a Japanese Zen poet as well. So the first poem I'll share from Theak Tan, which goes along with the first theme of tonight's talk, which is stopping, is called The Light of Winter. Theak Tan mainly wrote in Vietnamese, and then he translated his poems into English. And Theak Tan's English was quite idiosyncratic. And I've resisted the temptation to do any grammatical corrections or anything like that, because they're much more delightful as they are, and you get a sense of Theak Tan's character. So the poem is called Light of Winter. Facing white snow, suddenly oneself fading away, the whole universe turns into a great lamp. He wrote this poem in Vermont. Facing white snow, suddenly oneself fading away, the whole universe turns into a great lamp. And then Ryokan wrote, arriving here at this village, peach blossoms in full bloom, red petals reflect on the river. When we truly stop, when we truly practice this seemingly simplistic practice of stopping, then we're able to be fully present for what's there. We can see in Teyaktan's poem and in Ryokan's poem this practice of being brought to a stop by life. And so this somewhat artificial in the beginning practice of stopping with the bell or so on is a cultivating of the ground for this these moments in which the universe stops us, our mind stops, and we're fully present for life just as it is, without our thinking and cogitating mind getting in the way. We're able to treasure and to appreciate these beautiful moments. Ryokan continues, not yet disappeared, like a dewdrop on a blade of grass. I'm still in this floating world, moon in the morning. I think it's worth reading it again. Not yet disappeared, like a dewdrop on a blade of grass. I'm still in this floating world, moon in the morning. Not so long ago, I was enjoying watching the dew on the blades of grass here. There are times of the year when the days are getting longer, they're getting warmer, and the dew, when it comes at all, is there for just a vanishing, a fleeting moment. And then there are times of the year here, like we're experiencing now, where the dew every day, it seems, is becoming heavier and lasts longer. I remember last year towards the middle of winter when we were getting frosts in the morning, which then later melted and became dew, and then they would remain for most of the day, and we'd have about an hour and a half or 2 hours before the dew began to fall again in the afternoon and the water drops would gather. So it's such a fleeting thing. Those drops of water are there for just a few seconds or just a few hours at most, and then they transform. So what a beautiful poem from Ryokan on impermanence, on treasuring the moment. This moment that if we stop and we recognize, we realize it's never going to happen again, that each moment occurs only once in our life. And we take so much for granted without this practice of stopping. So this practice of stopping, as I've shared before, is both a practice and a fruit. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell. The second aspect of practice is calming, of coming back together, of not running anymore, of not being carried away. And Ryokan wrote a very beautiful and simple poem. It says, out breath and in breath. Know that they are proof that the world is inexhaustible. Try bouncing a ball. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. You end at 10 and start again. For anyone who's practiced meditation, you'll recognize this right away, that this is what meditation really is at its heart. It's the art of beginning over and over again. Just when you think you got somewhere, you have to begin again. In fact, meditation is about learning to constantly be a beginner. As much as we'd like to hold on to any experience, to hold on to any realization, to hold on to any insight, we have to let go in order for the new growth, the new insight, the new breath to manifest. You might have had the most delicious in-breath or delicious out-breath that you've ever had in your life. But you can't hold on to it. Well, you could, but then you'd have a whole other set of issues. You need to let it go and to let that out-breath become an in-breath, to begin again and again and again. This art of beginning again and again and again, whether it's with a breath or whether it's with each moment, is what we call in Buddhism the beginner's mind. And it's one of the most beautiful frames of mind that we can generate in our practice. To not think that we know everything. To not think that if we get to 10, that we've reached the ultimate. But if we get to 10, to then realize we need to start at 1 again. But somehow when we start at 1 again, something has changed. Our Pine Tree family, our ordination family, ordained in spring 1997 at the Lunar New Year in 1997. And Teyak Tan wrote a poem at that time to offer to us. It was called Spring Message. So the poem reads, laughing, speaking clearly, happiness on the lips, news of spring flows forth. Fresh flowers on branches, green grass and warm sunshine, blooming flowers and dewdrops, open seas and bright moon, high mountains and plains, shining stars and clouds, all is one mind. I bow in respect to thousands of flowers blooming today. I bow in respect to dry stones on the roadside, along with the obscuring dust storm wandering to the horizon. And I bow with respect to dry tears on bony cheeks in the immense world where deep suffering is, a game of up and down. Then I bow in gratitude to the deep blue sky, clouds swirling in uncertain destinies, floating freely as the days go by. Oh, the pure white snow covering millions of flowers despite spring's presence. The golden sunshine continues to sing in joy for young shoots to appear. Today, flowers already bloom. The grove is bright with plum blossoms. The bird songs resound afar. The birthless harmony of peace, all those who are talented come together to sing this melody. Never let it be off rhythm, so endless sky can be opened. The third quality of practice that we would describe the practice is resting. When we have developed the capacity to stop, when we've reunited ourselves, when we've come back together, brought all the parts of ourselves back together, then it's possible to rest. Many of us want to go, as I've shared earlier, to advanced practices right away. But I feel it's important to start with the most simple. And the most simple is to learn to rest our bodies. So in Plum Village centers around the world, we have 1 day a week that we call Lazy Day. This is a very precious day. And it's a discipline to be lazy, to not have any agenda. When we've learned to rest our mind in terms of meditation, then we have no agenda. In the same way with Lazy Day, that's a day when we practice to have no agenda. It's not a day for doing errands, not a day for this, that, and the other. It's a day to simply be present with things as they unfold. And it's incredibly subtle and incredibly challenging. The equivalent in my own root tradition, in the Jewish tradition, is Shabbat, which is a day that lasts from the sundown the day before until sundown of the day. And depending on how strictly you practice it, basically you set some kind of boundaries and you let the world be as it is. You don't make anything. And I think that's a nice way to relate to the practice of laziness or the practice of resting in terms of meditation, to not make anything. In fact, that's a Zen phrase that we hear often. Don't make anything. Just let things be as they are. So in an Orthodox household, they will not cook anything. They will not be involved in any busyness. They will not talk about work. They will not talk about all of these different projects. It's time outside of time and space outside of space. In terms of meditation practice, This is the quality of mind that we generate with the quality of resting. If we cannot do this on the physical level, initially with lazy day, but then hopefully we begin to allow that energy of restfulness, of laziness to inhabit our week, then there's no way we can really do that with our mind, because mind and body operate in unison. A great teacher knows right away where the student's mind is by the way they put their shoes, by the way they lift their feet, by the way they open the door, close the door. This is one way we can see that body and mind go together. Ryokan shared a very short haiku, a short poem about this that encapsulates this spirit of resting perfectly. Ryokan says, "As long as I don't aim, I won't miss. With my bow, I shoot an arrow towards the empty sky. As long as I don't aim, I won't miss. With my bow, I shoot an arrow toward the empty sky." The fruition of this practice of resting on a deep level is entering the Dharma door, the Dharma seal that we call the Dharma seal of wishlessness. There's nothing more to do. There's nowhere to go. We've already arrived. If you've already arrived at your destination, what more do you need? This is the embodied experience of this practice of restfulness or resting in terms of meditation practice, and in terms of the realization of practice. And then the last aspect of what we would describe as the fruits of practice is healing. Sometimes our idea of healing can, and what healing should look like, can prevent us from touching it. Healing doesn't necessarily mean getting rid of the symptoms. Teyak Tan in 1999, a year and a half before he died, he wrote a short poem that goes, "Understanding well birth and death, you realize no birth. Whoever understands true emptiness is clear about what I say." A teacher is not somebody who teaches just with their mouth, but as I've shared earlier, teaches with their whole being and is trying to create an environment for the student to grow in. That environment might be very gentle. That environment might be very fierce. That environment might look like there's absolutely nothing happening. But if we're in an environment where it looks like absolutely nothing's happening, we should actually congratulate ourselves, because maybe we've met a very good teacher. I think back to the times in which my teacher actually offered me guidance directly, one-on-one with his mouth, and it was very rare. Perhaps I can count them on the fingers of one hand. But when I consider the ways in which he showed me how to do things, with the way he was walking, the way he opened a door, his sense of presence, then I feel that I received so much. It was unbelievable what I received from my teacher. Sometimes I moved almost to tears when I realized in hindsight what my teacher or what my elder brothers have done for me. This is something that we only realize later on when we've become a senior or we've become an elder in the Sangha, a Dharma teacher, or an order into being member ourselves. We realize what's been done for us. And what's been done for us is usually done quite subtly, these acts of kindness. But a good teacher is always trying to create an environment for that student to grow in. It requires understanding that student, understanding their capacities. Some horses are easy to train. You just need to flick a finger a little bit and they're turned in the right direction. Others need increasingly strong kind of guidance or strong environments. And some, it might take years. Tay said one time to the community, Tay is very patient. Tay can wait a few years. We just keep trying. We keep trying. It depends on that person's karma. And then I'll never forget one way that Tay used to teach me was often with humor. And I can't remember if I've shared this story before, but if so, hear it again. We were in London, and I was quite shy, believe it or not, back in the day. And I know we have some English friends who are joining us this evening, and I think you'll agree that British people tend to be a little reserved, and that's often a wonderful thing. But anyway, we were on the tube. Tay had asked me to take him to the British Museum. He liked to go to the British Museum to see one thing and one thing only. He was not interested in the Asian art, Buddhist art that was in the British Museum. I haven't been there for 20 odd years, so I'm not sure if it's still there. But he wasn't interested in that at all. He was interested only in the mummy. He wanted to go and see the mummy. So if anyone's in London and goes to the British Museum and you go to look at the mummy, if it's still there, that's what they used to like to go and look at. So anyway, it was my job to figure out in the days before Google Maps, this was in 1999, the days before Google Maps or GPS or anything on the phones or anything like that, to figure out how to get everybody to the British Museum from where we were staying. So I figured it out, how to get everybody there on the tube. We got on the tube and it was rush hour. And there was this group of monastics, about 5 of us, who got on the tube, and everybody in London, being as they were, quite relatively reserved, kind of glanced up slightly and then looked back down or looked out the window. And then Tay said to everybody, all the monastics, sing a song. And I thought, oh my God, no, don't sing a song. And I started to edge away, while the monastics were singing a song. They sang "I've Arrived, I'm Home" on the tube. So I was kind of trying to push my way through the crowd to pretend that I didn't belong to this group. And once they finished "I've Arrived, I'm Home," I thought, I'm safe now, it's great. And then Tay called out, "Brother from high, sing "Happiness is Here and Now." And then, so I had to sing the song "Happiness is Here and Now" to everybody on the tube. And then Tay said, to us later on, you know what, they will not remember us, so much later on, but they'll remember this experience, and so we shouldn't be shy to just be ourselves wherever we go. And I always remember that, because it was a great teaching for me. Here I was thinking like, oh my God, these people on the tube are going to think that we're going to be begging them for money or something like that. But rather, like, there we were, we created this unexpected situation, maybe brought some smiles to people's faces, especially when they realized we were not going to be begging for money. And those people now we'll probably never meet again, but they have that memory. They don't really know who we were or who Tay was, but they have that memory of these people on the train that were singing "I've Arrived, I'm Home" and "Happiness is Here and Now." And maybe they even have a memory of me as a young monastic, trying to edge away and then singing "Happiness is Here and Now." So wherever we go, just being fully ourselves. So that was a way that Tay created an environment for me to grow in. To not be so concerned about what other people think, and to be constricted by that, or what I think other people might think, but to rather be free to express what's in my heart and in my mind in that moment, to respond to the situation and to sometimes change the situation. Ryokan says, "See and realize that this world is impermanent. Neither the early or the late flowers will remain. Although from the very beginning I knew that this world is impermanent, not a moment passes when my sleeves are dry." So this poem of Ryokan encapsulates what this experience of 2020 and 2021 has been like for so many of us. So many of us have intellectually understood the teaching of impermanence. We've understood it very well on an intellectual level. But it's really hit home this year. and not a moment has passed when our sleeves are dry. In the year 2000, Theak Tan wrote one of his last poems. He passed away in 2001 in Deer Park Monastery, and this poem, I feel, is one of his goodbye poems. It's called To All of My Friends. Life, death, peace, and joy are coming together beautifully. Human relationships are nice in so many ways. A moment you came, a moment of love and care, turning everything into eternal light. I'll read it again because it's a beautiful one. Life, death, peace, and joy are coming together beautifully. Human relationships are nice in so many ways. A moment you came, a moment of love and care, turning everything into eternal light. Dogen reminds us in the instructions to the cook that if you can't find the truth where you are, where else do you expect to find it? That as practitioners and as students of our teacher Tai, wherever we find ourselves, in whichever situation we find ourselves, some of us right now who might be listening to this talk, we might be in places in the world where it seems that there is a lot of violence and war happening. We might be in places on earth where there's not even air to breathe for those of us who are having COVID. We might be in any number of difficult situations. But as students of our teacher, as students of Buddhism, then we're invited to find the truth, find transformation right where we are, and that this is something that is possible. Where else are we going to find it? And that wisdom, that insight is the most valuable when it's rooted from that heart of our lived experience, not somebody else's experience, not some book that we read or some Dharma talk that we heard from Te or from Te Whap Hai or any number of amazing teachers, but from your own experience. The Dharma talk that manifests through your steps, through your breath, through the way that you lift a fork. That is the kind of truth that we're called to manifest. This week in the Compassionate Ocean Sangha, we're going to be continuing on from last week's practice of looking at the teachers that we've met in our life, those that have called us forth and how we continue them. And looking at our friends, those that support us on the path. There are so many beautiful sutras and teachings on what a true friend is. And I hope that the facilitators will take, and all of us actually, will take some time this week to have a look at, to research and have a look at some of these texts that share with us what a real friend is. And the importance of spiritual friendship on the path. I'm looking forward to a wonderful week with all of you. So I hope, dear friends, that something was useful in this talk this evening. It was certainly a delight to sit together with all of you. Let's enjoy a sound of the bell to conclude our talk this evening.